I used to think what an exciting time to be alive and to see God move in the world. Now I just doom scroll through Twitter with wide eyes shaking my head. Get your coffee. There's been a lot of talk of late about deconstruction among what I would classify as American Protestant evangelical Christians. I've thought a lot about this as I've read articles and watched YouTube videos, listened to podcasts, read through tweets, and interacted with other Christians, typically my age or younger, who are experiencing what they might describe as deconstruction or maybe reformation of their belief. Oftentimes, those that are in the midst of this will say things like, I've experienced abusive leadership within the church, or I don't like what I've experienced within the church. It's hard to argue against such things. It isn't for me to say whether or not someone has or has not been abused in some way within a church. I don't know. I'm not in their shoes. This has been compounded of late by a new podcast that is currently being released by Christianity Today on the rise and fall of Mars Hill. Mars Hill was a church that ascended and fell under the leadership of Pastor Mark Driscoll in the Pacific Northwest, mostly in Seattle, over the first 15 years or so of the 2000s. The podcast is very well produced, and it really paints the whole thing in a terrible light. And like I said, I wasn't there. I didn't go through it. There's no point in this podcast so far where there's been any counterpoints to things that the reporters are saying in this podcast. So it really paints the whole thing in a pretty negative light. Listening to it is kind of like watching the proverbial train wreck, or rather it's like watching the love story between Jack and Rose in the late 90s blockbuster Titanic. You know what's coming and you can't help but watch until the very end, the fade to black. Anyways, deconstruction, the new 21st century Reformation going on in American Protestant evangelicalism. Let's be candid. Every organization has its problems. Every institution needs ongoing course corrections and adjustments. Sometimes you do need to step back and assess, is this the way that it should be? Can it be done better or more wisely or more effectively? Are there things here that have too much in the gray area or on the margins, or that is just straight up unethical or immoral? Those are important questions. They need to be asked. But in my observation of these modern deconstructionists or these personal reformations, I've found that generally speaking, people are not deconstructing real faith or theology. They're deconstructing some form of cultural Christianity and probably some form of a number of different subcultures in late 20th or early 21st century American Christianity. The young deconstructionists are going through the typical early adulthood assessment of the things that they grew up in or under, and they are responding to one of the various forms of Christian subcultures of the day. What form? Well, it could be the hyper know-it-all presuppositional Calvinist subculture that has God all figured out in every possible way. Or the trendy hip consumption Christianity that for all intents and purposes is like church in a strip mall. And sometimes it literally is church in a strip mall. And it has all of the things that you would expect to find in the typical American strip mall, sometimes including Chick-fil-A. Or it is prosperity gospel multi-level marketing Christianity, which ordains virtually every good-looking, magnetic, upper middle-class person that comes in the door to be a leader with a title, so that that person might connect with more good-looking and magnetic up-and-comers to grow the church. Or perhaps they are deconstructing the rigid fundamentalist Christianity that was afraid of Harry Potter and secular music, and it long ago kissed dating goodbye because dating is the devil. I could go on. There are literally dozens of these American Christian subcultures. A new one grows up every week. Two of the newest kids on the block are, first, the anti-mask, anti-vax, anti-woke Christianity, and then right next door, it's angry cousin, anti-racist, anti-homophobic, ordain every gender Christianity. A week ago, I was having a conversation with my dad. I love the way that my dad sees things. He worked for more than 50 years in high-rise steel construction, and I think that if you don't have any close friends who are construction workers or in the trades, you should probably get some. They have a way of seeing the world that is a bit more clear. My dad and I were talking about institutions and institutional problems, and he was making the point that every institution or organization has major institutional problems. And the fact is, it is often not the problem with the institution or the organization itself, but typically the problem is the people within the institution or the organization. And people tend to think that if we just had better rules or better policies for our institutions or organizations, then everything would just be better, when in reality, the problem is that we are all actually broken and sinful and in need of an inside-out transformation by God's Spirit and His Word. We've been continuously indoctrinated with a foolhardy view that people are inherently good. We're all basically good, just blank slates. And if we just had better systems, better policies, better frameworks, then everything would be awesome. In truth, we are not inherently good, and things won't get much better until we can acknowledge the reality of our brokenness. So, deconstruct and reform every form and subculture you can find. And it will still end up broken, because at the base level, the problem isn't really the institution. The problem is you. Something to think about. We'll see you next time.